Thank you. All right, hello everyone. I'm Vincent, as introduced. I will talk about securing Kubernetes, but a little more about how to attack Kubernetes, because I think that's more fun too. So first, a little bit about me. I'm Vincent. I work at KPN. It's a Royal Dutch telco. In the beginning, I used to work as a red teamer, and I decided to switch to the blue team because I think it's good sometimes to look at both ways, how to defend, how to attack. Normally, I love to do binary stuff, but Kubernetes is a lot of YAML, and I thought YAML was interesting too. So first, I will talk a bit about what Kubernetes is. Then I'll show you the tools you can use, or the tool actually, of how to interact with it. Then I'll talk about some common pitfalls and show you some demos on how to actually own a cluster or own a pod. And then I will talk about how to secure your cluster. I have to say that some of the things I talk about in this talk have already been fixed in new releases of Kubernetes, because Kubernetes really move fast. I think when I started this research, it was version 1.8, and when I gave my first presentation, it was already version 1.12. So they are going really fast, and they are starting to think about security now. They have a lot of secure by default, and it's actually pretty good. I do have to say that you can still find nice YAML configuration files to put your Kubernetes cluster back to the old, easy-to-manage way. So there'll still be a lot of vulnerable clusters out there. So what is Kubernetes? Well, as I said, Kubernetes is mainly YAML. It's written in Go, and it's a container orchestration and management tool created by Google. And I think they released it in 2016, 2015. Oh, 2016, yeah. No, 2014. Sorry, guys. It's hard to read sometimes. And yeah, it mainly uses Docker. So all of the issues you have with Docker, like the containerization, previous escalation things, they also work in Kubernetes and vice versa. Kubernetes you can now have on AWS EC2, you can have it on the Google Cloud, it's even the canonical Ubuntu guys have their own one, and it's with cloud support, it's really easy for you to automatically scale your applications. You can automatically assign external IP addresses, you can automatically create load balancers, you can create replica sets of your website, so if you have a lot of people coming to your site at one point, Kubernetes scales really nicely. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people are such a fan of Kubernetes. I don't think it has anything to do with Docker. And Kubernetes also means helmsman or pilot in Greek. So the best tool you can use for talking to your cluster is Cubectl. The kubelet is actually a REST API, so you can also use curl and JWT tokens if you really want to, hate yourself. But this is the best tool, and it's also a really good post-exploitation tool, and you can download it statically from the Kubernetes website. So, if you ever hack a Kubernetes cluster, you just get this binary, and you're good to go. And it works a lot better than using curl. So Kubernetes has namespaces. With the Kubectl get namespaces command, you can have a look at all the namespaces that are there. You can use this to determine the scope of a user or a pod. You can also use it for administrative boundaries or resource restrictions. So let's say you have a CISO compartment, you only want CISO to use one CPU because you don't like CISO people. Then yeah, you can do all that. You can make policies that like I can only talk to people in CISO, I cannot talk to people in other departments. So you can actually use it to fine-grade your role-based access control, which is what they actually have in Kubernetes. It can get quite complex with all the YAML code that's involved. Kubernetes works with pods. A pod can be one or more container. It is usually just for, a pod can be a website hosting or a microservice. And it's also, just like everything, is configured in YAML. Over here you see an example of using the Kubectl command to list all the pods in the kube system namespace. And then you can see like there's a dashboard, there's a scheduler, there's an etcd which contains all of your secrets. And you can download a lot of images readily available. And it's quite nice. You have a nice repository. You can create your own repository, put some images in there, and just make sure you maintain a availability management program for your images as well. This is a nice example of how to create a pod. It shows the API version you wish to use, the kind of the type of thing you want to create, and the name of the pod, the namespace you want to put it in. And then you can say like, okay, I want it to be a container running Ubuntu 14.04. And because a pod dies when it's done with its job, you can make one that runs in an infinite loop, so it doesn't die. Like an Nginx web image, for instance, will never die. But if you have a pod that sends out an email, the moment it sends out the email, the pod is done, and then you have to clean it up, or you can restart it if some things are triggered. You also have Kubectl Exact, which I think is really interesting. It allows you to communicate with your pod. And if, for instance, you want to open a shell on a pod in the namespace countries that's called Nepal, you say like, okay, QCT Exact -I for interact, T2I for spawning a T2I, so you can use sudo and pass WD and whatever. And yeah, there you go. You have a shell. And this is the more important thing if you want to attack a cluster, because it's pretty useful to interact with a shell, right? Kubernetes also has services. So let's say you want to host a website, for instance, and you want to expose it to an external IP. Again, if you use a cloud Kubernetes, then you can automatically assign it an external IP. And you can easily find the services with the get svc command. You can see the IP that's associated with it and the type of forwarding it does. This can be really effective for finding attack surface. So let's say you have a pod with not many privileges, but you can list the services that are available. You can have a look. Some of them might be externally reachable. Some of them might run in privileged mode, which I'll show you later, can cause you to completely own the cluster. And it could be really useful. And yeah, Cubectl works with secrets. Secrets are stored in etcd. I still think they do it in plain text. It's in a binary format, but if you run strings, you can see a lot of the tokens still. And a lot of tokens are created automatically for API access. So you can see there are some service accounts in there. There's a default token. I created my own token, and you can also add SSH keys. Yeah, all sorts of secrets actually. And you can use these secrets again to fine-grain your role-based access control. And as I will show you in the advice later, it might be good practice not to automatically mount a service account on each pod, because having a service account means that you have certain privileges inside the cluster. And if you manage to own a small pod and you can then talk to other pods, then yeah, I think that's an issue. But yeah, if you want to have a look at the secrets, you type that command. So now, what could go wrong? What have I seen? I'll talk about that a bit later. What I usually have, what I have seen is exposed endpoints, unrestricted APIs. There was a certain period where Kubernetes had no authentication or authorization. Everyone who could talk to the Kubernetes API was admin by default, which was funny. This is actually what I found in 2016 as well. Sometimes you have privileged containers running with a command injection on the outside, and the moment you're in the pod, yeah, you can own the entire cluster. And also the dashboard has been unsecured for quite a while. So for me, what intrigued me when I started working at the red team was I found a Kubernetes cluster in 2016 while I was scanning the KPN external ranges. And KPN is quite a big company, and I was actually happy to find something. So I found this thing running on port 8080, and I had no clue what it was. So I did the dearbuster thing. I found some endpoints, and then I Googled them, and then I found out it was Kubernetes. And it was indeed a Kubernetes, 2 years ago. There was no authentication. I was admin already. I was like really happy with it. So I created a pod, and with that pod I was in the internal network. I did some scanning, and you find the Jenkins, and then it's over. And then I found out it was a customer, and then I had to stop doing everything. But yeah, they had it removed, luckily. When you look for Kubernetes on Showdown, you can find like 16K Kubernetes Masternodes. A lot of them are protected by basic authentication. You can try brute force that, but yeah, nowadays they're actually having authentication, which I think is really good. There are probably some in there that are not authenticated. If you want to have a look, yeah, Showdown. And later I'll show you a more interesting one. I actually managed to find an unauthenticated Chinese dashboard. I was like, let's not attack our allies. Let's have a look at our enemies, because then I can stay in my own country, which is nice. And yeah, this one was unauthenticated, and yeah, you can look around if you want. I mean, it's the Chinese. Also interesting is etcd, what I just told you. Like etcd is maintains your secrets. You can find a lot in China again. They're like the number one. And you have you can try to run, for instance, that query there. And because etcd by default has no authorization, I think Kubernetes now does. But if you make a bot to just query all the keys, you can find AWS keys. You can get JWT tokens and maybe hijack a cluster with everything you find in there. It's quite interesting. So, now let's talk about how to, what to do when you are inside a pod. This was my example when, after I found the cluster in 2016, I did a pen test, and they were like, oh yeah, Kubernetes. Do you want to do a Kubernetes test for us? It's like, yeah, sure. So they gave me an API endpoint with a command injection, basically. So I could just type hostname and get the output over there. I created a quick shell in Python, and I got an actual reverse shell. And when I got my reverse shell, I type printenv, you can see the Kubernetes API. This is the one managing your pod. And if you do that, you can also try to list some secrets. And as I said before, the service account is automatically mounted. So in here I can find out my namespace. I have the client certificate to talk to the Kubernetes cluster, and I have a JWT token, which means I have some kind of privileges on the cluster. Yeah, and then I netcoded to the kubelet, and I was like, okay, sure, I can talk to this guy. So now I have a small demo showing what you can do when you have a shell. Can you guys read this? No, you cannot. Can I zoom in? I think I can zoom in. No? Can you guys read this actually or not? Is this better? Oh, I managed to zoom out actually. That's pretty impressive. There you go. So I start with a shell. This is actually on my own personal cluster. Oh wait, that's not readable, is it? Yeah. Few minutes. Zoom in a bit. One. Let's try again. One more. It should be fine. So yeah, I start with a shell. Over here you see like the namespace I'm in. I listed all the namespaces and all the pods that are available. On the left you see the namespace. On the right you see the pod. You see there's a Kubernetes dashboard available there. Now I type get services for all namespaces, and you can see there is like a vulnerable service available. There are some Kubernetes clusters that are available I can communicate with. And what I now try is I try to spawn a container in privilege mode that runs Nginx, because Nginx doesn't complete, so I have all the time in the world to try and do a priv-esc. So because this is an unauthenticated, unauthorized cluster, I just created this new pod. And as you can see, it's up and running. And now I actually have a root shell inside this pod, which is running in privilege mode. So now I go to /dev, and you can see like all the character block devices that are usually only for the host that are available. There's a mount with stdia1, which is the block device of the cluster. So I just mounted, go to /mount, it's like, hey, this looks like a root file system. Let's have a look at pods.wd. Yeah, you're basically there. You can also cut etc shadow, you can add a cron job, you can put your authorized keys in there. Yeah, this one is actually hacked Donald Trump. Later I'll show you another one where we actually look at the shadow file and stuff. So yeah, what just happened? I would be worried because I think the p-tape is on that particular cluster. Yeah, what happened? So first I used Exact to spawn a shell. And when I had my shell, I did some recon. I had a look at the pods and the services that were available. And because I had so much output, it means that, yeah, I have at least read access on everything in this cluster or in this namespace. But since I used all namespaces, yeah, I could see everything in the cluster. So then I created a privileged pod with privilege mode enabled and mounted the root file system. And from there on, it's only the file system, so you don't see proc, you don't see sys. But if you do a cron job or you add an authorized key and change the SSH configuration, add yourself in the shadow file, you basically completely own the kubelet node. So the problem is actually privilege mode. You can see I've highlighted it right there. There are some valid reasons for you to have this privilege mode enabled. If you want to do some stuff on the file system, then you might need this. But yeah, if you don't need it, please turn it off because it's a security risk over there. Because privilege mode allows you to basically do the same things on the node that you can do on your own file system. So if you have root in a Kubernetes pod, you actually have root on the node as well. And if you then can mount the file system, then you root on the file system. So it's the same with Docker, I think, and with other containerization tools. Just be very careful with the privileges you want to give it. So during the pen test, they fixed some issues, but they still had a Kubernetes dashboard available. And before version 1.7 of Kubernetes, the dashboard was opt-in by default. There was no authentication. So if you manage to do some forwarding magic and get to the dashboard, you can just, yeah, basically do the same thing because it was the cluster admin. Nowadays, you can use a kubeconfig file or a JWT token to authenticate to. But in my demo, because this still happens a lot, I found them even on the internet, you can still, yeah, pretty much own the cluster. So what I will do in the next demo, I'll try to list all the pods. This time I'll do it in one namespace, and I'm not allowed to create anything in this namespace because I tried to create the same pod, tried to get a shell, and yeah, it doesn't work because I have no privileges. But I can still list the services in the kube system namespace, And I found that there's a Kubernetes dashboard. So maybe let's have a look at the Kubernetes dashboard. You can do some curl, and then you find like, oh, no authentication. This is a Kubernetes dashboard, and then you can start to, interact with it. If you don't have read access on the services, for instance, then you might need to use masscan or nmap to find anything else that is in there. But the ranges can be quite far apart, so you might be a bit unlucky there. So now I'll try to give a demo there as well. Let's see. Give it a nice zooming in here. So yeah, we tried to get another shell. In Nepal this time, we listed namespaces, and we see like, okay, is this the wrong demo or is the right demo? I think it's, yeah, it shouldn't work. This shouldn't work. Try to do a privileged one. Yeah, I'm forbidden. I cannot create any pods here. So what I do now, I list the namespaces. I see that there's a cluster IP for the Kubernetes dashboard, which means if I connect to that IP, I'm talking to the Kubernetes dashboard. And now should be a nice demo video popping up. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, now I'm on the dashboard. I did some IP forwarding, got access to the dashboard, and I can look everywhere. I can, go to different namespaces. I can look at tokens. I can look at the secret token. I can look at the certificates. I can look at the namespace, the nice JWT token. And you can basically just browse around. There are quite some ways for you to get access to a pod. Over here, I will just do another example of spawning a pod. But you can also try and find an already privileged container. You can look at the JSON configuration of each individual pod. And if you find that one of them has a privileged true, you can just interact with that pod. And if it has a shell installed, you can just do the same trick I just showed you. Now I'm looking at the Kubernetes dashboard tokens. Yeah. And it's also really funny that Kubernetes actually has a web-based shell for you in the dashboard. So you don't even have to use a reverse shell. I think I'll show you now, like, okay, these are the log files. I'm going to copy and paste the same YAML file I just had, but the only difference is that I already mounted the root file system on /root. Because my /root in my pod is empty, so I decided to mount the host file system over there. And yeah, I do a privilege mode, mount it. Yeah, that also works. It's pretty funny. And yeah, in the /root directory, I call it loots, because there's a lot of loot over there. So I'm spawning the pod. Now click on it, and then there's an exec button over there in the upper right corner. Then it shows you a shell, which is pretty nice. Doesn't work in all browsers, but it is what it does. You can see it's privilege mode. So yeah, there you go. And look at passwd. Look at the shadow file. Oh, it's like passwords in there. And there's a home folder. In the home folder is a Donald Trump directory. And there might be some interesting things there. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence there. I hope the FBI isn't watching this video. So, yeah, that's interesting, right? The Kubernetes dashboard now has authentication. It's not admin by default. But for a while on the Kubernetes dashboard, on the Kubernetes website, they were like, hey, you want to go back to the old configuration? Here, download this YAML file. They finally removed it from their website because it's a bad idea to not have authentication on the Kubernetes dashboard. Another nice example, the port 10,250 was actually the port directly talking to the Cubectl API. So if you had that port exposed on the internet, there was no authentication up to, I think, February of this year. So if you find this port open on the internet, and trust me, you'll see my later slides, there are ports open on the internet, you can get unattended code execution as the admin on all of the pods that are available. So yeah, there's a nice Medium post here of a guy who found out that I think there were Monero miners on his cluster, and then he went through the logs, and then he just saw some guy doing a command like this, basically doing a touch. Well, I think he did a wget with his Monero miner, and yeah, you can do it in all your pods. I mean, if you have a big Kubernetes host, you have a lot of mining power. So if you have a VPN, I think you should have a look, make some Monero. There's also a 10,255 port on Kubernetes, which is the read-only port. Even that one leaks some information. Over here you can see the pods that are available in my cluster. You can have a look at the device nodes I have on my cluster. I think this is also already an issue. They don't think it's an issue to have this as a read-only port. If they don't think it's an issue, then don't put it on the internet if you're owning a cluster. Because I think this is valuable information. At least the tokens and namespaces, it's very easy to communicate with the API if you know all these things. You can also find the parameters. I can show you later. So yesterday it was kind of rainy in the hotel, and I was like, okay, I'm going to find out if I can find port 2250 on the Shodan. Because when I gave this talk for the first time, Shodan didn't scan for this particular port. So yesterday I found out that now they do, and they have like 109,000 ports open on that port. They're not all Kubernetes, but you can do some magic by searching in a common name. If you have a common name containing cubes or node, it's a good chance you'll find a Kubernetes cluster. And I found a Kubernetes cluster, and because I didn't want to go full black hat, I just decided to dump the logging of one pod in a Chinese cluster, because I love Chinese clusters. And yeah, it was unauthenticated. You can read all the things there. And this is another example of another Chinese cluster, where you actually can see, yeah, you can see everything. And all these pods, you can own easily. You can just spawn a container, or you can even find a privileged container and put your Monero miner on a Chinese cluster. I mean, that would be funny, right? A Westerner hacking a Chinese cluster, putting a Monero miner there. I think that's pretty cool. And also in bug bounties, it's quite common nowadays to have a Kubernetes cluster. And I think Tesla, their bug bounty involved someone hacking their cluster. And the Shopify one was a very interesting one. There was a server-side request forgery. In Shopify, you can make your own website, and it's basically a Kubernetes pod. And with Shopify, there was a method of making a picture, a PNG file of your particular shop. And some guy found out that there was a server-side request forgery in that tool. So he managed to dump the private keys for the namespace. And using that, he managed to, I think, let me see. Yeah, the metadata was not concealed. I think in the Google Cloud, you can choose to have the metadata concealed, and I think you should, because this guy managed to get the client certificate, the private key, and he started listing the pods in the Shopify environment. And yeah, just pods there, because it was censored. And then he used the get secret command to get the JWT token for his namespace service account. And once it's all censored, it's very nice. And when he had that token, he could just, do an exec on any pod. And he was root on all instances of Shopify. And this is really cool. Imagine having this in your bug bounty. Yeah, it's impressive. And he got 24.5K in dollars. I think that's a lot of money. And a lot of Shopify swag. I think you should only do it for the Shopify swag. Who cares about money, right? Only this guy cares about money. If he has any. So, yeah, what can you do? I think I went really fast, because just like 22 minutes in my talk, and I'm already in the end. So with Kubernetes, you can define separate tiers. You can have a front-end tier, you can have a back-end tier, you can even make an Nginx tier. And your front-end should only talk to the back-end and maybe, to some other things, but the back-end should definitely only talk to the front-end, or vice versa. So you can make some nice egress filters there. And again, all the configuration is done in YAML. So if you don't like YAML, then Kubernetes is not for you. Yeah, you can set up namespaces, make nice administrative boundaries, and you can also filter your service port on the outside. So like port 10,250, 10,255, those are all ports you shouldn't be looking at. Those are the node controller ports, the Qubit API, etcd, even the Calico network controller. Don't put that stuff on the internet. And if you're in an internal pen test, you should scan definitely for those ports, because usually the Kubernetes container, the Kubernetes cluster is, let me see, if you get access to a Kubernetes cluster, you can probably do some lateral movement from that host. Yeah, and again, do not expose the node to the internet if it's unnecessary. At least use a VPN or an Nginx reverse proxy for authentication. This is an example of a network policy. This is denying all egress, I think, except port 53 for UDP and TCP. Yeah, people think that this is only for DNS, but of course you can put a shell on any port. But this is an example of egress filtering. It's also recommended to limit the service exposure. Also, don't allow everyone to SSH to your cluster. Maybe use a Bastion host with some whitelisting there. And if possible, disable privilege mode. Yeah, automount service accounts. If it's not necessary, please don't do it. And there are now some tools available like Kubebench and Kubesec, which actually do some auditing of your Kubernetes cluster. So you know what to disable and what to have enabled. Usually it's just all it should disable. In Kubernetes, you can make a pod security policy, and in your pod security policy, you can say you can only run as this UID. By default, all pods run with UID 0, so that's root. But you can also say use like any number, like 5,000, 4,000, then it's not root on your cluster. You can also set the deny escalating exec thingy, which means that you're not allowed to do a privileged escalation from the pod. And oh no, wait, deny escalating exec is that you cannot do an exec -i on a pod that's privileged. So let's say you have one pod in your entire cluster that runs in privilege mode. You don't want people to easily compromise that one. You set the deny escalating exec. So that way I cannot use that command to own the pod. And the allow privilege escalation mode, which sounds very interesting as a security guy, you should always set to false. Because I think that's a big win. Check your containers for vulnerable software, because people seem to forget that also containers can be vulnerable. They're basically Apache web servers or mail servers, whatever. Make sure you have a nice way of keeping them up to date. Maybe have some reviews there. And this is an example of a hardened pod configuration. I made it run with UID 1000 and have a GID 2000. I gave it a nice name. I think I copied most of it from a website. You can mount like a volume there. You set our privilege escalation to false, the read-only file system to true, because the root file system, there's no reason for you to modify it. Run as non-root, I also set to true, because I think pods should not run as root. And you can also even whitelist or blacklist some syscalls. So for this, I didn't allow my pod to have raw sockets, or I didn't allow my pod to use the chown command or the chown syscall. So you can basically make a very nice blacklist there for things they cannot do. Maybe they can only ls, or maybe they can only open a socket, a normal socket. You can whitelist everything there. Again, service accounts should be limited. Apply the principle of least privilege. Nowadays Kubernetes people do this. So when you deploy your cluster, you will find that you don't have a lot of things you can do. But keep it that way, I mean, it's hard for administrators sometimes to administer their cluster, but when they want to make things easier, which a lot of people now do for their cluster, you can easily get, compromise the cluster. That's it. That's my talk. We got some time left. Do you guys have any questions? No questions? You have a question? Yeah.
Did you actually play with SU Linux profiles on the pod to make sure that people get to some things using the SU Linux?
No, I didn't. But it's definitely possible. Yeah, it's supported actually. Huh? Yeah, his question was, did you actually play around with the SE Linux profiles on the pods? And I didn't, but I think it's a good advice to do. You can definitely have a look at that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
What do you think the likelihood is that Trump actually uses a Linux machine?
That's a good question. I think it's very unlikely. I think he likes Windows 98. Those were good times. Any more Donald Trump related questions? No? Any more questions? There's one over there.
Yeah. What do you think is the best way to detect?
To detect these kinds of things?
This kind of behavior on Kubernetes.
You can with logging definitely. There are some log files in the Kubernetes where you can see all kinds of this. You can see this behavior. You can see the exact commands that are getting executed, the exact API calls that are made. So
want to log speed as big as the infrastructure?
Yes, probably. Actually, my next research is how to do forensics on a cluster and how to create a dashboard for these kind of things. So next year I'll come back to you with the answer to this question. Any more questions? Nice, you have questions. We have like 32 more questions.
Did you manage to analyze managed offerings of Kubernetes, like from Azure, AWS, Google?
Did I have a look at them?
Yeah. Are any one of them more secure than by default than the other?
I didn't have a look at that. No, sorry. It's interesting. Yeah, I would go to bug bounties and then have a look at them. I think that's But no, I don't know. No. I think it kind of depends. You can for Shopify, for instance, they use the Google one. but they still have a lot of settings they need to put themselves. Like they forgot to conceal metadata in this case. So yeah, I think it really depends on how you use your cloud instance. But yeah, I'll come back to you next time with an answer to that question. Any more questions? Okay, then I think that's it. If you have any questions, I'll be walking around. And thank you.